Welcome back to episode number 10 on the wealth of self. This is an exciting milestone for the podcast, and it helps that we have a wonderful guest who has an incredibly inspirational message to help make this episode even more special. Tonight, I'm joined by Natasha Durkins, who is a senior executive leader with the Federal Aviation Administration and a soon-to-be author finalizing her book on how to be fiercely joyful. Despite her joyous demeanor and great career achievements, Tash didn't begin her life this way. Her journey to radical self-acceptance, comfort with vulnerability, and speaking her truth were tasks that took consistency, diligent work, and healthy mentorship in order to achieve. Tash was blessed from an early age with these great mentors, namely her parents, who were vocal civil rights advocates in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Despite this, she found herself in a strange position of trying to fit in a town where the majority of her peers were white and didn't necessarily accept her into their social circles, and her black peers teased her for acting white. This created a sense of isolation and an inability to fit in that proved to be yet another obstacle she would have to overcome on her journey to wealth down the road. She distinctly remembers her father's mayoral campaign and his surprise support from the one and only Muhammad Ali. And even though her dad lost his bid at office, she always remembers his lesson of humility and learning from defeat, and his view of the outcome as a win for all who were able to hear his message about equality. Just as soon as Tash began her college experience at Howard University, she had to pause in order to help her mom with her terminal illness, which later claimed her mother's life, but always remembers the immense outpouring of love, support, and impact that her mom had as she watched friends, families, and loved ones pour into her mother's appreciation ceremony. This event showed Tash that she wanted to affect others' lives positively, just as her mother had done. Through many more obstacles of self-acceptance, overcoming limiting beliefs, and personal realizations, Tash has made a name for herself that she is immensely proud of, and shares some of her most vital lessons that she has utilized to achieve this growth during our conversation today. I'm very honored to have her as a guest on the podcast and hopeful that any viewers or listeners will be able to take away some actionable steps for growth and wealth in their own lives. Thanks for tuning in to The Wealth of Self. All right, welcome back from the intro. This is episode 10 on the wealth of self, and I'm honored again to have another connection from, you guessed it, Phil Green. So this is Tash Durkins. She is in the studio, and we're going to be speaking about her life, her journey, and hopefully toward the end we'll get into her authorship because she is preparing to write a book, Fiercely Joyful, which when will that be out for people listening?
It'll be out in September.
Oh my
September
gosh.
2023. I can't wait.
So this is right around the corner, but I wanted to turn it over to you and just dive in on this conversation. Before all of these conversations, we do a little review on certain questions and sort of topics that we can hit on. And as you were rolling through some of those, I was just like, I hear that. So there are two in particular that I'm really excited about, but welcome to the studio, and go ahead and just introduce yourself to the listeners.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me, John. This is super exciting for me. Glad to be with you and absolutely love the concept of wealth of self.
Thank you.
Just fantastic concept, and it really resonates with me. I am a girl from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who grew up there, born and raised, and then moved here to the DC area to go to college at Howard University at first.
Very nice.
Fantastic experience. Loved the HBCU experience. But between getting here, being from Scranton, Pennsylvania, moving to a big city, having no idea what I was getting myself into, and then some challenges that followed shortly after I got here.
Yeah.
It really shaped me in a lot of ways into the woman I've become today. And I'm, now an executive, working for the federal government, love my job. And I'm embracing an opportunity to share with people personally and professionally some of the things I've learned that help me be incredibly grateful and incredibly satisfied and fulfilled in my life.
Yes, ma'am. And the title of your book, I couldn't think of a better one just based off of knowing you very shortly, but joyful is one of the very first words that comes to mind. You have that persona about you, and I think people after watching and listening to this will feel that as well. And certainly after that book is released in September, they will 100% understand it at that point.
I hope so.
I wanted to trace it back to the origin. So you talk about Scranton, Pennsylvania, which for most viewers, the first thing that's going to pop into their head is probably The Office, right? And Michael Scott and Jim Halpert and all these people, but also the current president of the United States, Joe Biden. And so when it comes to what the public may see or perceive of Scranton and what your experiences were there, what kind of things would you highlight for somebody who's never visited or doesn't know anything about Scranton?
Well, certainly small town feel. It's not a tiny town, but it's a small town. And I was one of a very small community of people of color, predominantly white neighborhood. We had a lot of folks at the time. I think the demographic has changed a bit, but at the time there were a lot of folks that had Italian heritage. So man, some of the best food ever, Italian food ever in Scranton. We had a big Italian festival every summer. It was awesome.
You wouldn't think about that in small town America.
Wouldn't.
Usually it's
really unusual, right?
That is nice.
And then there was Amish town very close nearby us too. So we had very diverse kind of group of folks around.
Yeah.
But that experience was challenging though for me because I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. My parents were civil rights activists, and they really honed in on us being proud of being Black. And we studied history. We literally, John, had to give a Black history summary every day before dinner, before we could eat.
Wow.
So, we learned our history.
Yeah, a very deep education and appreciation of the culture. Yeah.
And even things as simple as the popular Black magazines at the time, Jet Magazine, Ebony Magazine, Black Enterprise. We had the largest collection of those magazines in the state of Pennsylvania for a while.
Wow.
Because my dad collected them.
Yeah.
So there was that kind of world. And then I went to school with kids that pretty much didn't look like me at all, and weren't, sitting at home studying Black history all the time like us. And just came from a very different world. And I didn't feel like I fit in there. And the kids that did look like me tended to see me as what people say is acting white.
Right.
So I eventually started doing things to try and get their attention, try to fit in with them, fit in with the white kids at school, and it just, nothing ever worked. I tried to glob onto my brothers. They were much more popular. That didn't work either. Yeah. So anyway, it was a challenging time, and it became sort of the basis for why I ended up going to an HBCU.
And it sounds like you were really in the middle ground, which is a tough place to be because you find yourself in between these cliques or niches, if you will, and you feel like, I think, probably you didn't have a place to go. And one of the things we hit on before we started our conversation is you started to sort of look for other ways to sort of identify and create that persona for yourself because it wasn't necessarily available from the people that you were interacting with at school or other friend groups that you were a part of. of. So tell me a little bit about how you coped with that and what sort of things you started to maybe attach yourself to.
Sure. The easiest way for me was, how I dressed and, how I showed up.
Yes.
So, back then, I'm giving away my age, but everybody wanted Guess jeans so bad, myself included.
Yep.
And I couldn't get them for two reasons, really. One, they didn't fit. I was very tall and had a large frame, so everything looked like high waters on me. It was a situation. Nobody let me forget it. And my parents really wouldn't pay for brand name things.
Right.
My dad thought it was just a waste of money, so instead, we are clothes shopping for school every year. We went to New York City and went to the wholesale district.
Yep.
And my dad would buy, half dozen or a dozen of the same thing, different colors. And we were good to go. And I used to say I would get Ike shoes instead of Nikes because Dad wasn't trying to part with the Nike money.
I'm resonating with him more and more. I feel like everything I own is some shade of gray or black. And I've got 3 of each of them or something. So.
But yeah, so it just, I focused on trying. And the other thing I did is, again, fighting even my physical body when my shoe size changed from a 9, because I'm in middle school. A girl wearing a size 9 went to a 10.
Yep.
I refused to tell anybody. And I kept wearing size 9 shoes. And this is why my feet are a situation today. And I had to get bunionectomy because I tore my feet up. That's how bad it was. I was trying to fit in and I didn't want anybody to know how big my feet were.
Yeah. Well, you look at like traditional or old traditional Asian culture with things like foot binding, right?
Yes.
Because the small foot was desirable and it just caused like crippling issues with gait and foot step, your ability to step or roll your foot. So yeah.
Just horrible.
Yes, it's terrible. But not having a firm fitting pair of shoes can be like detrimental in a lot of ways. But I think for my generation, it was the Hollister and the Abercrombie, like we talked about. And I look back at some of the stuff I bought and the stuff I wore, and I was like, what the heck? It's just like torn to shreds, looks ridiculous, has logos galore all over it. And I couldn't be further from that now. I try and stay pretty monotone.
Monotone now?
Yeah, it's maybe not the best way. It doesn't show outwardly my character or artistic side as much, but it keeps my wardrobe very consistent day to day. I don't have to think very much about it.
It's interesting. I'm gravitating towards that now because it's about simplifying at this stage in my life. And I talk about this even in the book, but having some sort of routine and creating ways to not have to exert so much energy making decisions.
Exactly.
So that probably works for you, right?
It's like a minimalistic approach. And you think about the 2 people that come to mind, well, the one individual that comes to mind is Steve Jobs.
Of course, yes.
And so he's got the blue jeans and the black tee and that, or maybe even turtleneck, some variation of a black top. It's just, that's it. That's what the wardrobe is, top to bottom. But when you look at your evolution through your schooling period, you start to navigate through some interesting life events. And you talked about how, your dad was an individual who was self-employed and at a certain point went for, the political side of things, ran for mayor in Scranton. Yeah. So what kind of job did your parents hold, and how did that sort of push him in particular toward this sort of political movement?
Well, it's quite interesting because my dad, when he moved to Scranton, because my mother was raised there. My dad was from North Carolina. And when he moved to Scranton, he was soon after selected for a job as, I think it was, his title was the director of the Housing Authority, which was focused on equal opportunity housing in Scranton. And, excuse me, that exposed him to some of the things that he just didn't recognize were an issue, in terms of people of color not having equal access to some things or struggling in ways that he just didn't realize. So that was one of the few jobs he had where he worked for someone else, I'll say, because he was self-employed for so long. But then he opened up his business, Craig & Craig Enterprises, and My dad was one of those people, and I could never do it. I wish I could. He could focus on whatever business stream of income worked, where the money could be made. I have to love what I'm doing.
You and me are just alike right there.
Cannot
it's like so
just
hard to
do
separate.
It. Yes, I cannot. He would get so irritated with me sometimes because he tried to talk me into different businesses, but he started buying out, because at that time in Scranton, a lot of businesses were shutting down. So he would buy out restaurants.
What was the reason for that?
It was the economy changing.
Okay.
And a lot of people were leaving the city at that time. And this was kind of when we were starting to transition to the electric focus after all the years of the coal mining and the railroad stopped and all of those things.
Is that an industry there in Scranton that a lot of people are attached to?
It is.
Interesting.
And it was back then, they said, because of the they even went into the coal mines, and when they couldn't find any more coal, they started digging it under houses, and it was really bad, situation. And so my recollection when I lived there at that time, they used to say that Scranton had the highest cancer rate in the country. And everybody I knew had cancer. So it was part of the reason why I couldn't wait to leave, But so my dad took advantage of the businesses closing down. He'd buy out restaurants, hotels, stores, whatever it was, and would resell the equipment, the furniture, the coolers from the store, the stoves from the restaurant, the shelving. My gosh, you would be surprised how much money you can get for the shelving.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, he would just resell all that, and he'd make very good money doing it. The part me and my brothers didn't like is we had to clean everything. So that was
he
our
had a
job.
small workforce already built in.
Exactly. That was our job. We all started working at 13. But yeah, it became a very good income for my parents. And my mom also worked in the business at that time. Eventually, some years later, they divorced. Things changed quite substantially, but for a time, we were, really in good shape. And then he decided, as he started meeting more and more people, that he wanted to take a stand and try to influence change another way. And that's when he decided to run for mayor.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so that was maybe more intimately connected at the time than you realized to his civil rights roots in a lot of ways. And what about Mom? What was she involved in as far as employment is concerned?
She worked at the business, the Craig Enterprise business, doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
After my parents separated, it was really tough because that was the only job she ever really had outside of high school.
Right.
And so she had to go work and do janitorial work in the Jewish nursing home up the street from us.
Yeah.
We had a big Jewish community too. And I went too. By this time I was 16, and I was when you could start working in Scranton.
Yep.
And so we both had a job there, and that was how we tried to make ends meet. My brother had a job too, part-time, and he was playing sports, so he couldn't work quite as much.
Right.
But yeah, so that was it. She did not have a college education, high school educated. And so that was the extent of, her professional career.
Right.
Until, thank goodness, she landed a job at the University of Scranton.
That's awesome.
So that kind of changed things and gave us some brighter days.
Yeah. Well, you talk about your dad's sort of political aspirations at this time, and unfortunately this resulted in a loss. And I would like you to talk about that because, and we didn't go into this earlier, but my mom, she was a teacher for 33 years, literature, English, wonderful, wonderful career that she had and influenced a lot of people. Awesome. I believe that truly, but also had political aspirations and ran for U.S. Congress. Lost badly, but put her heart into it, a heart and soul. And I remember at that time I was 13 or 14, and I didn't get it. I don't think I was involved in sports in school, and I was kind of like, why is this, why are you putting so much energy into this? And I just didn't see the bigger picture at that time. And now working with photo and video, I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have been at this stage when she was doing that, because I could have helped so much. But I think that we have a little bit of a similarity there with a parent who wanted to do big things in office and fell short. So I'd love to hear that story from your perspective, and how your dad made that a teachable lesson for you.
He totally did. I was 8 years old when he decided to run for mayor of Scranton, and in my mind, it was a totally achievable goal.
He's your hero, right?
Exactly.
He's not going to
Dad,
lose.
of course he's going to win. It's just a given. And it was a pretty fantastic campaign. My dad recognized that he needed some help and some attention. So suddenly one day we're in the car, the whole family driving to Allentown, Pennsylvania. And my dad just knocked on Muhammad Ali's door. Which is like,
The
who
Muhammad
does
Ali.
that? Muhammad Ali's door. He just not unannounced, there was no connection, no nothing. And a few minutes later, we were all inside the house. And first of all, I don't even know how he knew. I guess everybody probably knew where Ali lived. But we were in the house. We were there for hours and hours that first visit.
Yeah.
And Ali was doing magic tricks for us, which was so cool. And he did come up to Scranton and campaign with my dad.
Yeah.
There's like cool pictures in the newspaper of Ali and my dad. The police were kind of surrounding them as they're walking through the city and campaigning. And there's one where he's holding me next to my brother and my mom and dad, which is so cool. And
You got to get that framed somehow.
Yes, I do. I have to. I keep looking. It's so cool. It's such a cool.
You share
cool
the
picture.
file with me, and I can print it right over there. I'll
Oh
get it
yeah?
for you. Yeah.
Okay. But it was such an amazing thing, such a fantastic experience. And then election day, and my dad lost. And I'm like literally devastated, John. I could not believe it, because I was convinced he would win. He wasn't upset at all, though. I was like, well, why aren't you upset, Dad? Yeah. He said, darling, we actually won. We didn't lose. We won. And I was so confused. And he essentially told me that now people have heard us and they know what we stand for.
Absolutely.
And I was like, oh, okay, so I can feel good, about this, because now people know what's important to us. And he was thrilled. I mean, he was thrilled. He only got 1,000 votes, and his competitor got like 15,000. Yeah. So kind of like your mom's situation, perhaps, but it was still just a motivating experience for me, because it also taught me, even if you might not have success in the traditional perspective of what people are expecting for the outcome, you can still win. You can still benefit. You can still help others.
Right.
And I would guess, I don't know, but I would guess too that he inspired particularly some people of color.
I don't think you have to guess.
Who felt like, we can't do this. We can't do that. We can't run for office. We can't, I'm sure he inspired people.
Yeah, 100%. And it sounds like that lesson in and of itself has been a thread of motivation for you in your own pursuit of self-discovery and pursuing your own goals, despite maybe feeling like you didn't belong or couldn't get there. Sort of like a self-limiting belief in a lot of ways. But another instance that you talk about in your submission was, you talked about your mom's illness and how, as that progressed and you moved into a period of celebration and remembrance of her life, that there was a very immense outpouring of love from that community, and you were taken aback by that. But it showed you that your mom was deeply loved and admired by a lot of people. And I have a similar. It's unfortunate because our moms are no longer with us.
Oh, I'm
but
sorry to hear that,
it's similar, So I'd love to hear this element of your story as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mom was my best friend, so really tough, when she was sick, and I ended up dropping out of Howard because I went back home to take care of Mom.
Yeah.
And she got better after some surgeries, and radiation chemotherapy. So I went back to school, and then I got the call that she was terminal. So I went back home. And my mom was amazing about kind of trying to ensure I was informed, and I had to make as few decisions as possible when she passed away. So she called a family meeting. You know, we all got together. She told us everything that she wanted, what her wishes were, and it was clear. And we were just very transparent talking about these things.
Yep.
And so one night we're sitting in the house, apartment, and she said, "I wonder who's going to come to my funeral." And so I start, kind of naming names. I'm like, it's probably going to be a lot of people. We're just kind of going through a list.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I'm talking with other family members and friends, and we said, you know what? This is one of those situations where you give your loved one their roses while they can still smell them. So we decided to have an appreciation ceremony for her at the church.
Yeah.
And John, that night, the church was full. It was standing room only, in the church, in the balcony, and there were people outside.
Yeah.
And those who couldn't make it, they sent videos, which I think were VHS tapes.
That's special. Yeah.
But
Wow.
they sent videotapes, and there were some cassette tapes, I feel like, where we just heard voices. But I mean, I just couldn't believe that my mom had touched so many people. I knew people loved her, but I didn't know until that moment how much, so I just remember in that moment thinking, I want to impact people just a fraction of the way my mom has.
Yep.
If I can do that, I think I'll have been a good person in this world.
Absolutely. And such a role model to follow. Like I mentioned, I think about Mom as a teacher and the lives of young people that she influenced. And when we had a celebration of life for her, it was just really special to see those individuals come out. Those were people both who had her as a teacher, but also people that she affected whenever she was doing advocacy work for teachers, both in the classroom and retired, with other organizations in the state of Missouri. And, I have to reflect on that at times because, as a teacher, they don't get the respect that they deserve in this country. And it's extremely sad, and they're not paid enough for the stuff that they have to prepare for and deal with in the classroom setting. And I find that devastating on so many levels because it is the foundation of the future of our country to have a good and what I believe should be a public education system that gives equal opportunities to everybody, regardless of where you live or where you come from. But to know that the people who were there came out and supported in that way, I feel you exactly where you're like, wow, that is special.
I'm so glad you got to experience that.
Yes. Yeah. It was an extraordinarily special moment. But I wanted to segue a little bit as you now have returned to Howard University and you start to sort of navigate into a career path because as of now, you're with the Federal Aviation Administration. And as we spoke about, there's a lot of catch up that you're playing to keep up with the advancements in the field of aerial technology and unmanned aerial vehicles and all these things. But as you were navigating that end of your college career, where was your mind at that time and how were you anticipating taking those next steps?
John, it was really tough. I could not afford right away to go back to school. And Howard was too expensive when I finally did go back, which, it saddens me that I couldn't go back to Howard and graduate, but I just couldn't afford it. I ended up graduating from George Mason. But in the meantime, and when I first got back, I suffered incredible depression because I just... I literally talked to my mom at least twice a day. Yeah. And literally she really was my best friend and I just didn't know how to be without her. Yeah. And so I literally I was so depressed. I would sleep all day and stay up all night watching the Home Shopping Network and ordering things. Ordering things that I didn't need.
Little
but
retail
that was
therapy.
My therapy right there. Oh my gosh. And my brother, I have lots of siblings, but only one brother that I was in the home growing up with my whole, first 18 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And we share the same mom. And he was just as depressed too. I mean, it was really rough. And so since I couldn't go back to school, I went and got a job at Roy Rogers. And I was working at Roy Rogers in downtown DC in DuPont
Mm-hmm.
Circle. And that was the job that taught me how to treat people because I was treated so poorly.
Yeah.
I didn't know people were so dismissive and disrespectful to people in the service industry.
Once you work service, you understand how to behave in a restaurant.
Yes.
I bust tables at Olive Garden. It was like, oh my goodness, it's important to be nice. Yeah, very important.
Oh my goodness. I couldn't believe it. So yes, I learned how to treat people. And now that has stayed with me all these years. But yeah, just getting through that period and working until I was able to go back to school. I did get a really good job working in telecommunications, but because I didn't have my degree yet, I was paid a lot less than everyone else. And I had to focus on differentiating myself,
right?
To show that I was adding value too, So I remember that was something my dad was always really good at, and that's why people always came to him for business. Mm-hmm. So I adopted some of that, through that process. And, from there, I've had a fantastic number of people who have supported my development and my growth over the years. Many, many, many more fantastic leaders and managers than not. And now I try to take all those fantastic things I've learned from them and apply that to my team now.
Yeah, paying it forward in a way. It's a very special thing to do, especially whenever somebody has imparted good wisdom or knowledge on you. It's the least you can do, right?
Right.
It's like, here's what I know, take it and run.
Exactly. And I'll say too, one of the things I've learned that I'd like to share with the listeners just to be mindful of, I would assume who was willing to be an advocate for me. Rather than just be open to whoever was willing to be an advocate, So because I was assuming essentially that it was people that looked like me or women mainly that would support and advocate for me or be a sponsor at work, I was overlooking some people.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful that I learned that in time. And now I take full advantage of everybody who wants to support.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say thanks again for your viewership on The Wealth of Self. If you're enjoying this content, please give this video a like and don't forget to comment down below if parts of this conversation are really resonating with you or maybe even somebody you know. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and you'll be among the first people notified whenever new content is released. Additionally, if you'd like to support the Wealth of Self's mission, there is a Patreon link down in the description where you can become a monthly supporter. Behind the stories, there are a lot of cameras and lights and audio equipment and everything that helps these videos come to life. It takes a lot to run all of that consistently, and your support makes sure that we can regularly release these stories. Finally, if you are a photographer or maybe you're interested in video production and you'd like to learn more about the equipment that we are using to document these stories, you can check out the kit.co link also in the description. Any purchases that you make there will earn a small commission for us to keep on telling these stories. So without further ado, let's get back to the interview. Well, as we navigate into this second portion, you speak about your book and how this is very much an accumulation of lessons that you've picked up throughout the course of your life and understanding events that happened in the past and how you've had to overcome some of those things in order to live more joyously. And I have to hit on this. It's a plug for them, not that they need it, but there's a Jonah Hill documentary on Netflix called Stutz, and it's a conversation between Jonah and his therapist. And it's very candid. It sort of breaks the fourth wall. And the thing that I've always most appreciated about that, because it, beyond being really well done and filmed beautifully, the gentleman who is the therapist in this case gives very actionable steps for people who may feel like they're in a rut, they may be depressed, they may not know what their next steps need to be. If you watch that, you will be able to step away from it with some some absolute golden nuggets of information that you could very realistically apply to your own life. And as you near the release of this book and reflect on all the things that went into the creation and the authorship of that, I think listeners would find a wealth of knowledge to take away a few pieces of your own growth with them after listening to this. So as you've become more joyful in your life, what were some of the tools you implemented to get there?
Well, that's a fantastic question, John. It's been years in the making, trying to figure out what those tools should be. And I'll say that, unfortunately, there's a lot of my childhood that I don't remember. And I realized that in my mid-20s, essentially, when suddenly some things I had repressed just literally came back out of nowhere. I woke up one morning and remembered things that had happened that I literally just totally suppressed in my memory. And, there were incredibly difficult things. So learning how to cope with challenges has been something I've had to do for years. I remembered suddenly that I was molested by my grandfather, molested by my babysitter, who, also both of them, I trusted incredibly. And then I was raped, by my first boyfriend. All of these things, I believe that the fear I had, of talking about these things and the fear of facing myself in the mirror, because I believed I had caused it all when it happened. Right. I was certain that it was my fault. When it all came back like a flood, I recognized it was time to acknowledge what I had been through, and that I could no longer keep a secret about it. It couldn't be a secret anymore to the people that I loved and I was closest to. So I literally called my dad. He was still living at the time, and my brothers, and I told them we're having a family conference call. Yeah. And I told them what I'd been through. Of course, they were stunned, and hurt and upset and angry and, wondering why I never said anything. And I tried to explain it. But what I came to recognize as well, John, was that I had been constantly carrying weight on my shoulders as if I couldn't share my burdens. Since my mom died when I was 20 years old. And even then, I remember when she died, everybody, I broke down one time and really cried, not at the church, at the funeral. This was right before the funeral, a couple of days before. And it was like I was chastised by my family. You can't break down. We need you to be strong. Be strong, right? And I know they meant well, but that was a burden on me. And so I just carried that. My shoulders were so heavy. And it was in that moment after those memories came back that I said, no more. I refuse to hold these things inside and be solely responsible for my well-being. I actually need help. Yeah. And so for me, I would offer listeners, one of the very first things is to be willing to acknowledge what has happened, whatever trauma you have experienced. That requires vulnerability.
Yes, it does.
Some courage, but I can guarantee you it pays off in the end. That acknowledgement is the very first thing. And then beyond that, allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. We tend to try and say, I'm okay though. We'll acknowledge the thing and say, I'm okay. I'll be fine. It's no big deal. Yeah. No, it actually is a big deal. And quite frankly, it's unhealthy if you don't allow yourself the grace to go through it.
And it can compound too.
Absolutely.
You let it build and build and build, and something's got to break.
Absolutely. In some area or areas of your life, right? So allow yourself to go through those emotions, experience them. If you need to, and I strongly recommend it, seek professional help. Yeah. Talk to a counselor, Group therapy is an option. There's so many options out there. So take a look, get online, see what works best for you. You can even do it virtually these days.
Yes.
But it helped me to have someone to help me understand what in the world I went through and how it influenced who I was and how I was showing up.
Right.
And I'll say lastly on that, because I had been hiding things for so long, that became my MO. My modus operandi was to hide what I was dealing with, how I was feeling, whether I was happy or sad, and you just never really knew. I started getting confused because I was hiding. And that was just so unhealthy. And that began my personal quest to start living more authentically because I didn't like how I felt on the inside.
Right.
So, that is, I talk about some of those things in the book, of course, but that willingness to be vulnerable, John, has been really, I would say it's my brand at work and outside.
Yeah.
My coworkers sometimes look at me like, oh my God, did she just say that? I'm still professional, John.
Of course.
I'm totally professional, but I will call a thing, and I'll do it with care and compassion. There's a book, Kim Scott wrote the book, Radical Candor, and I love her philosophy for having tough conversations with care. It's a fantastic concept. And I use that, and my willingness to be vulnerable has helped me establish incredibly deep relationships, deep and meaningful relationships. But more importantly, that what I saw at my mother's appreciation ceremony, people cared for her that way because she cared for them.
Right.
And she was vulnerable in doing that.
Yeah.
She helped rape victims. She did all these things in her spare time. And I have an opportunity, we all do, to touch people in whatever moment we have with them, whether it's a small single interaction or it becomes a friend for a lifetime or a season, but we all have that opportunity. And so that's what I look for, to put a smile on the face of the guy who looks angry as all get out, or there's been people at the grocery store like, oh my God, I forgot my wallet. I'm like, okay, what we gonna do? I can help you out, whatever the case may be, but taking that moment to recognize someone could use you, 100%. You can be their blessing.
Yep.
So that's the thing now that comes out of it. Every opportunity I get, and that brings me joy.
Yeah. And that's such an important lesson. I feel like we all live such fast-paced lives. It can be easy to walk past someone and not acknowledge them or not put a smile on your face or do these little things, really little things that can change someone's whole perspective or their whole day. And I think the other lesson out of that is you never know what someone's going through.
Exactly.
Right. Yes. And so I think you have to maybe keep that in the back of your head during interactions that you approach this with kindness, be nice. It's a very important elements to introduce into your daily activity or daily interactions with people, and they will reciprocate in time, and that appreciation will be passed forward. But when you talk about, coming to terms with certain things that happened and how to admit to yourself that it's time to change, it's time to move forward, I think so many people get so rooted that they feel like they cannot take that step. And this can happen in situations that involve trauma. This can happen in situations with people betting on themselves and taking a chance. Maybe that's starting a business or whatever that might look like. That first step is so damn hard. So when you think about passing forward advice to people who may feel like they're stuck right now with a similar situation or a decision of their own, what do you say to them? What can they do actionably to take that next step?
Well, that's, something I have struggled with certainly over the years. I have been in the space of creating stories and narratives, about what I couldn't achieve. And then therefore didn't make the attempt, I didn't take the step. And I'd say a couple of things. One, first just ask yourself, what really is the risk? Because a lot of times it's not that big. It's something that you can actually take,
Yeah. You've created this narrative in your head that says it's so big and it's so scary. And
what's really going to happen if you start the business and you get no clients right away or none for months? What can you do differently is the question. Not, oh God, why did I do this? I need to fold. No, don't fold. And what keeps resonating with me these days, in particular about this type of topic of trying, your expectation should be that you're going to have failures. Don't go in thinking it's going to be perfect. It ain't, y'all. It's not going to be perfect.
And if you think it is, you're going to find out the hard way. Oh my gosh. There are lessons ahead, I tell you right now.
You would know, right? You know, so it is critical that you have managed your own expectations. Forget about everybody else, just your own.
Yeah.
That's kind of how this goes. No matter what the thing is, new career, dating, there's going to be challenges, right? When you recognize that, the next piece of it is to determine how you're going to cope with failing forward. You know, what does that look like? So how are you going to recover?
Yeah.
I have a coach through Better Up, and I have all kinds of coaching opportunities through Better Up. And one of my other coaches is a well-being habits coach. And she asked me that very question when I was trying to settle on a new routine for myself to try to make sure I could write to get my book done. And she said, okay, well, what are you going to do if you miss a day? I was like, I can't miss a day. Right. She's like, you're going to, whether you get sick, you work late or don't get up, you miss the alarm clock, whatever. So what you going to do? And I love the advice she gave. She said, make yourself a rule. You won't miss more than 2 days in a row. Oh, I could do that.
That's
and then it's
rule.
Like, brought me down, gave me some calm, because it's like, okay, the whole world's not falling apart, and I'm not going to end up not publishing a book because I've
just
missed a day.
Yeah.
So putting it into perspective, having a plan of what you'll do when it happens, because it will, and giving yourself some grace.
Yeah, of course.
Right? You just got to give yourself some grace.
And what great advice. I mean, when you think about people falling through on a task or a new routine or an activity just because they miss one, it can feel devastating in that moment where you're like, oh, well, now got to throw it all out the window. But if you can outline a rule for yourself with that level of grace that says, I missed it here, but we got to pick it up tomorrow. That's so powerful. I think about my own workout routines right now, which are non-existent and have been for a while, and that's going to help.
Me too.
That is going to help. So I appreciate that little piece of advice.
Well, I'll say this one other thing, if you don't mind.
Of course.
People will look at me. I tend to call myself an unconventional athlete. I am a marathoner and a triathlete.
Nice.
I ran Marine Corps marathon, weighing well over 200 pounds. But what mattered most was, and I had to calculate this for the book, but I ran over 600 miles to be able to do 26.2.
Wow.
Right? So it's the little steps. It's showing up for yourself the way you'll show up for everybody else. Because this is a big deal, I think, that for years I didn't show up for me. I still struggle to do it. I'll show up for everybody else I've made a commitment to. If I made a commitment to me, like my workouts, I'll catch up later.
Right.
And I read in a book once where they said, if your friend canceled on you constantly, like you cancel on yourself, would they still be your friend? No,
good.
You cut them off, right? So
that's a great way to frame that. Oh my
yes,
gosh.
Isn't that such a good, right? So it was for that marathon and that in my triathlons, and I did dozens of halves and all these races, the work of those incremental steps is what is going to get you there. So 100%. When you're focused on that big thing, I always failed when I didn't have a plan. And I mean a, really small incremental plan to get to the big thing. I never made it.
Yeah.
So just taking that step back, figuring out what those little things are, you can get there.
That's awesome. And it's really a one brick at a time sort of approach. Because it's not bad to have lofty goals. I think it's important to have big milestones that you want to achieve, but you have to be realistic about it and understand that there are little lily pads along the way in order to get there safely and realistically. And I think the growth trajectory is easier to follow when you recognize that, because to not achieve a big goal is, in a lot of ways, it can feel like a constant failure over and over and over again. And that is very defeating, very, very defeating. Well, you not only have applied a lot of these lessons in your authorship of the book, but also in your career with the FAA. And I would like to talk to you a little bit more about that, because it sounds like that's been a major part of your life. And you're, in an executive position at this point in your career, but also had sort of a mentor who maybe you didn't jive with so well initially. I'd like to get into that with you.
I sure did. And it's funny because I never had a plan to be an executive. Didn't want to be, because I saw them getting moved all over the place all the time. Like, I'm good, but this was not a dream I had for myself. Mm-hmm. But I'm so grateful that others did.
Yeah.
I ended up in a job working for someone who I had grown to dislike simply because he would not speak to me in the hallway. And he knows this very well. He's going to crack up when he hears it. But his name is Dan Smiley. And Dan he's just not necessarily the most friendly person.
What a name.
When he doesn't know you. I know, Dan Smiley, right? He wasn't smiling ever. And I'd see him. I'd walk down the hall. I didn't know who he was at the time, but I'd smile and say good morning, and he would just nod his head. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I said something to you. Why don't you say something back? And for those listeners who might not know, this is like a thing in the Black community. It is like the ultimate disrespect. If we speak and you don't respond, oh my God, it's a situation.
This was a trend on social media for a while.
Oh, was it really?
People passing each other in the, just closed mouth kind of thing. And just like you could, that was the theme though. It was like the disrespect originating from that. So I could.
We take it way too seriously. But so when I found out about a job opportunity that I was super excited about, somebody said, "Oh, go see this guy, Dan Smiling, interview with him."
And you were already in the FAA.
I was.
Okay.
I was already in the FAA, but I had been in. At least at that time, I'd been in more administrative, business-focused roles, and I wanted to be in a more operational role, working on the National Airspace System inner workings in some way, be more directly impacting it. And Dan was responsible for national traffic management. That was his job. So he was the deputy vice president. So when I got into that suite of the office, and I'm walking and I see him, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't work for this man. Oh my God.
Guy I've passed in the hallway all these times.
Right. Yeah. And let me get in here and just get this thing over with. I go in to interview, and Dan, some of my colleagues had said some very kind things about me.
Yeah.
He said, look, I've heard great things about you. We can do a detail. You can come over and we can see if this is something that works out for both of us. But I hear you're the person I need. I was like, thinking, what'd they tell you? And it was actually, interestingly enough, it was a demotion for me. I didn't care because the pay impact was minimal, and it was experience that I needed, that I knew would broaden my career.
Yep.
And quite frankly, this is part of why I'm an executive today. My boss seeks out people who have a diversity of experience, different types of organizations and work. And so I went to work for Dan, and he would give me work to do, and I was scared to do it. So for example, I'm in this job basically as an advisor to an executive. And he would have me go to his executives that work for him and give them some work to do or ask them for information. I wouldn't go to them. I'd go to their advisors. And he found out. He was like, I'm pretty sure I asked you to go to the directors. What's the problem? I was like, well, I don't want to bother them, blah, blah, blah. He said, okay, let's get this clear. You represent me. You can talk to anybody in this organization. It is coming from me. So if I ask you to do that, you do it. Okay, got it. And he liked, what I came up with. I ended up doing it, followed through. The work products were great. And then I'll just tell this quick story. Dan would say he saw something in me. Mm-hmm. He was a controller, air traffic controller. I was not. So me and him together was really a great compliment because I had the non-operational expertise. He had the operational. Mm-hmm. It was a really great combination. So he took me to this meeting with all of the CEOs and COOs of the top 9, 10 airlines. I'm sitting in that meeting scared to death, like, oh my gosh, only woman in the room. Mm-hmm. And there was one man of color in the room. And when Dan introduced me, he said, this is Tash. She's my senior advisor. Anything you need, you can call her.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what? Don't tell them to call me. I don't know anything, But then we went on a lunch break and he said, what'd you think about the meeting? I was like, oh, it's great. I'm learning a lot. Very informative. He said, I didn't bring you here to sit quietly. You haven't said anything. Mm. I was like, I don't really know what to say. He's like, no, you have ideas. Mm-hmm. There's things you're hearing and you want to I need you to participate. You're here to participate.
Yeah.
So empowering. So empowering.
Yeah, and what a great way to say it too. Mm-hmm. He's really saying the platform's here. Take it.
It's here, right? So that was for me in my FAA career the start of me fully leaning in to just be who I was, mm-hmm. and suddenly I realized what I had to offer, even mm-hmm. though I was not a technical person.
Yeah,
it was still valuable, and so that has been the sort of the thing that kind of kicked off my career to a different level because of Dan.
And do you still have interactions with Dan, or is he still there? Or what is that relationship like?
He retired a few years ago. Mm-hmm. He became the vice president after he was the deputy. Mm-hmm. And when I became a vice president of a different organization recently, of course I heard from him and he's like, oh my God, finally you're vice president, because mm-hmm. in his mind, I was ready like years ago.
Yeah.
But this was kind of what he had hoped for me.
That's amazing.
So he's thrilled and he's still an amazing advocate. And the other thing that's great is Dan is a friend. Mm-hmm. We could not be more politically opposite on everything.
Yeah.
But because we developed a friendship mm-hmm. over time, we would sit down and talk about the things that we totally disagreed, just to understand each other's perspective.
Yeah, it's so important.
It was so refreshing.
Not
to
enough
just
people
talk.
do that.
Yeah, just talk. You agree to disagree, but just talk and try to understand. Mm-hmm. And I value that about him too. Very
much so. And that's a good anecdote for anybody listening, because I think the political stratification in our country today is terrible.
It is
really bad, and it's weird for me because you really look at it, everybody kind of wants the same thing,
right?
But the way that your outlet spins it and the way my outlet spins it, it makes us feel like we're mortal enemies somehow.
Exactly.
So I think that's a great piece for anybody listening who, maybe has some differences with somebody in their lives. Simple conversation and getting to know one another can do a lot.
I totally agree. Yeah. Totally.
Well, as you've navigated this piece of your career and found yourself toward the upper echelon now, you mentioned also during our initial call that there's a women's executive organization that you are a part of, and that has opened doors, but also allowed you to interact with other people that you share a lot in common with. And I'd love to hear more about your experiences within that organization.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So this organization is called Chief, mm-hmm. and it's a national women's networking organization that actually my cousin introduced me to. Mm-hmm. My cousin, who is phenomenal, Jasmine, much younger than me, but very accomplished. Mm-hmm. And I saw she had joined the organization. I started researching. I'm like, this is fantastic. It's for C-suite level executives.
Yeah. Some high-powered ladies in there.
It's like, oh my gosh. And so as a deputy vice president, that was close enough mm-hmm. for me as an executive in the government. That's when I joined when I was the deputy.
Yeah.
And just being, quote unquote, in the room with the women who are running the Fortune 100 across the country, and all of these small business owners and everything in between.
Right.
phenomenal experience because it's all about lifting one another up.
Yeah.
Everyone just jumps in to support, to help. It's not competitive. It's like, what do you need? Here you go. I got it. How about this? I mean, it has just been a phenomenal support system. Even in we have smaller core groups as well, where we really get to know folks one-on-one. It's about 10 to 12 women, share very private challenges and help and support each other through them.
Yeah.
It has just been amazing. I had to pay out of my own pocket to join, and it is an annual commitment worth every cent, because I also found a group of chiefs who were writing books, and that's how I found my book program.
Yeah.
I've been talking about writing a book for 10 years, John, 10 years and never got it done. And I realized this program by book creators is fantastic, called Modern Author Program. It's all about writing as a group. The motto is never write alone, which is me all day. I need help. I need accountability. I need somebody.
It's got to be motivational to be with that group.
Totally. Yeah. So that's what got me through. And I would meet with some of the folks in the program, other chiefs that are writing right now. In fact, Thursday we're doing a presentation to all the chiefs about the books that we're writing and in the process of writing the books and what we learned and what we can, offer as some advice for those who want to pursue it. So it's been fantastic.
Well, speaking of lessons learned writing books, I've had the opportunity to speak to some other individuals who had authored before, and it's a challenge. I mean, there are some setbacks that are involved there. I think once you get toward the publishing end of things, that can get dicey with edits and re-edits. So what are some of the things that you've encountered as you've gotten closer to this first publication?
So for me, I have taken the route of hybrid publishing, it's called, it's not self-published. You're not going with the traditional publisher. It's like right in the middle. So you have a great deal of autonomy and accountability to get things done. I own all of my work, but I also have a fantastic support system. And for me, I've just gone into this thing kind of like, I'm not the expert here. So I'm going to lean on the people who are.
You should.
Whatever
absolutely.
it is that, when my editor calls and says, this is not making sense to me, which, I'm like, okay, let me fix it. There's very little that I push back on because I defer to those, who know better than me.
Right.
And so I love it. So, but the way my program works is, I will do a pre-sales. And start selling actually soon, my book.
Nice.
And as it's going through the final editing process and so forth, and start all the marketing. And I have a whole team of people supporting me every step of the way. So it hasn't been challenging other than needing to show up.
Right.
And the two things I love that they've done, one, they gave us this phenomenal structure. Like if you fail, it's because you decide not to do the work. They give you every possible tool, including, and this is what I want to point out quickly, the mental health is very important to me, and recognizing the emotions associated with big challenges or goals that we take on is critical.
Yes, ma'am.
They even walk us through that.
Yeah.
They have us pre-planned for what we're going to do when we decide to quit writing, basically.
Wow.
And
really
who you're going to call. Like we had to document who we were going to call, what we needed from them, everything. So you're prepared. You're just fully prepared. So it was really awesome.
That is fantastic, and probably things that most people who are starting off on their journey of writing don't even consider. And so to know what those roadblocks are ahead of time before you really dive in, that's got to be a big leg up, big leg up.
Yeah, because when it started happening, I was like, oh, they told me I was going to feel this way.
This was coming.
Okay, I know what to do.
Yeah. Well, with this sort of release approaching in September, you are in the thick of your career, or would you say maybe end of your career with the FAA? I don't know if you want to label it, but
closer to, because I'll say what my boss told me when I got the vice president job. He was like, oh, okay, well, what are you doing to start grooming, the future of the organization?
Right.
Sorry, Tash, you're not the future anymore. You up here. So was like, what? You gonna
Pass
retire
it
before
forward.
me, But yes, so certainly on the latter end.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you then? If you had to look forward, is there another book down the line that you feel like you'd want to approach, or how do you sort of navigate the end of that chapter of your life?
I absolutely will write another book because going through this process, I had to keep stopping myself with some content. I'm like, this doesn't belong in this one. I got it. This is a book too. So I will definitely do that. But John, I love talking to folks. I love going out and speaking to audiences that can benefit from some experience I've had.
Yep.
That I believe is my responsibility. I have this section in the book where I talk about we were created in a unique way for a purpose. It's not by accident.
Yeah.
And so when we show up authentically, then we're leaning into that and we're here serving our purpose and making our mark.
Yeah.
Right. And all these years, there's a lot of years where I spent holding back and hiding who I really was. Now that I'm comfortable being me, that I love me and all my faults, now I'm ready to share what I've learned with others because I want to help other people grow and be happy. I am so joyful. And that is not to say life is perfect at all. There's always things that are wrong. It doesn't mean I can't focus on the things that are right and just come up with plans, things I want to do to have some incremental progress on the things that aren't so great. But I just feel overwhelmingly blessed and grateful. And I want everybody to feel that way. And you can choose to. Yep. That's the point.
Right.
You have a choice. I was talking to someone at an event here not too long ago. And she was talking about how she's a seasoned nurse, but she can't show up as she wants to. She's a Black woman and she wants to wear braids to work. She said she can't. She's like, I just can't do it. It's not accepted. I said, well, if it's not you as the most seasoned nurse
really,
that can do it, who's going to ever do it?
Yeah.
You're making a choice. Are you really going to get fired for showing up in braids? She's like, well, no, but they're going to react. But you're making a choice. Think about how you can have a conversation with the right people, what that looks like, but you can do this if it's important enough to you.
Well, I love that. I think that authenticity and self-authenticity is so, so important. And it's definitely something I've struggled with as a creative, trying to find my own style and my own work, and being okay with stumbling along the way as you discover that, and being okay with putting out content or a specific style of photography or video methodology that maybe is a little untraditional. I've watched so much to learn what I know now in this field that in so many ways it sometimes can begin to feel like you're just duplicating the process that's out there. And that authenticity element is so, so key to really becoming who you are. And so I feel like a lot of people out there, and I hope that a lot of people out there listening that'll resonate with them. But with the wealth of self, you have imparted so much wealth to the listeners and viewers out there with this episode. And I just want to say thank you so much, truly, because, a lot of the points you hit on too were very actionable, which I appreciate. Good. And I think people, if they choose, like you said, it's a choice. If they choose to take that action, take that step, they have some pieces in here that they can really use to change their trajectory or change their lives. But as is the nature of the wealth of self, as a final question, looking back at your life and your accomplishments and understanding the lessons that you've gathered up to this point, what does true wealth mean to you?
It took me a long time to figure that out. I was very much focused on wealth from a financial perspective for years, and eventually learned that it's not about money at all. I believe that wealth comes from the inside, and it comes from this feeling of abundance related to all of the amazing things that we have. And I'm not just talking about tangible things. I'm talking about relationships.
Right.
I'm talking about the sunshine on your face in the morning. I'm talking about those moments when you make somebody smile, when you get an unexpected card in the mail,
That's a good feeling.
it's just right. It's like so amazing, right? And that to me is wealth. I feel incredibly wealthy because I have amazing people. I remember thinking of someone in the family was sick and had extended family and really had no one to care for them, and they needed help. Somebody went, but can you imagine not having people that would just come?
Yeah.
And so my husband and I sat and talked about it. We're like, who would come help us? We had a whole list of folk.
Yeah,
John.
that's good.
We had a whole list of folk who we knew without question would show up.
That's wealth.
That is wealth.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I think for those out there, that's something to strive for, to be able to ask yourself who would show up and make that list and know that those are the people who care deeply about you, love you deeply, think about you, maybe whenever you don't even realize it. And that's a beautiful message.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
But this has been phenomenal. This has got to be one of my favorite
Thank
conversations
you.
up to this point. This is fantastic. And I'm just so happy that you, were able to come in here, be vulnerable, and share your story. Because at the other root of the wealth of self is to share authentic stories from real people. I think so much of what we see online is celebrity and political and these individuals who have just an abundance of coverage of their lives and their stories already. And I want this to be a documentary effort for everyday voices to make an impact in the world. And I think that you have done that today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It is an honor for me. I'm humbled to be able to share. And I am so blessed to know that you're doing this work because I know that so many people will be touched.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks, John.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in on this episode of The Wealth of Self. As always, your viewership is immensely appreciated. If you want to take it a step further, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you are among the first people to know when new content is released onto our channel. Additionally, this is all about hearing voices. If you have any questions, anything that really resonated with you during this episode, leave a comment down below. I'm very eager to hear your voices and your thoughts. Until next time, thanks for watching The Wealth of Self.